Good evening. I'm Stephanie Mortis-Stevens, the assistant editor at Trinity University Press. Welcome to the Maverick Book Club. It's a monthly series that celebrates all things Texas with a particular focus on South Central Texas and San Antonio. As a local nonprofit and a mission-driven publisher, Trinity University Press embraces the responsibility and the honor to not only share, but take a deep dive into the stories of our community. We're so fortunate to live in a region rich with culture, history, and local traditions, and so much of it still remains untold and unknown to the people that live here. One of the biggest champions of sharing and celebrating the little-known histories of San Antonio is Mark Rybczyk. An award-winning disc jockey, you might remember him on WOAI or KJ97, but he's now gracing the Dallas airwaves, but we still like to claim him as a San Antonian. In the early 1990s, Mark released San Antonio Uncovered to local acclaim, and that book has enjoyed a cult following among residents and expats alike for over 2 decades. Not too long ago, Trinity Press had the pleasure of working with Mark to put together a completely revised and updated edition of this gem of a book. Tonight, Mark will be joined by Dave Rios, another San Antonio radio legend. Until his retirement this past December, Dave was the longest continuous running morning host at Kono. He's also a passionate supporter of numerous charities throughout the city. With 2 San Antonio history buffs and enthusiasts like Mark and Dave, the discussion tonight is sure to be a lively one. We're so happy you've joined us, and enjoy.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and thank you, Trinity University Press, and of course, the Maverick Book Club. Are you a Maverick? Are you going to find out tonight, if you are, where that expression came from with this little gem of a book. San Antonio Uncovered, ladies and gentlemen, my friend from the 80s, and he's still here, Mark Rybczyk.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. You know, little known fact, Dave and I actually were on KXZL Radio Kexel back in the mid 80s. I think we were called The Breakfast Jam.
San Antonio's best raw.
And yeah, I think our show lasted a very short time before I was let go. And I moved on. But man, if only they knew what they had back then, Dave.
Ain't it the truth that every time you get fired from a job on radio, it's the best thing that ever happened?
Yeah, really. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Our friend Laura, who worked with us there at KXZL on 9th Street, downtown in San Antonio.
Yeah.
Remember the big snow? There's so many adventures we've had in our broadcast careers. I started in 1983 at 104.5 KXZL, and our friend Laura said, Dave, you need a new morning partner. There's this guy I know named Mark. He's really funny. He's a nice guy. And I said, okay, we'll give him a try. And then I think you replaced me eventually. I just love our storied history of broadcasting. But for the last 35 years, you've been delighting millions of radio listeners. I've been delighting about 1 million radio listeners for about 25 years. And I remember you, first of all, people who don't know Mark, ask him about luge. He loves the luge event at the Olympics. But Mark is the guy that would be in the basement of the Institute of Texan Cultures, flipping through all the pictures, looking at the history, going, I'm going to do something with this someday. And he has. This little gem of a book, San Antonio Uncovered, the new edition, and the first edition was a gem also, is full of pictures, full of stories. And since I've known you, Mark, you've been an adventurer. And from broadcasting from the Pearl beer can down on Hollister Freeway to finding out, I think you were with your Boy Scout troop when you found out where the secret exit was to the roof of the Tower Life building?
You know, actually, I worked in that building for a while, and the Tower Life building used to, which at one time was one of the tallest buildings west of the Mississippi, and the tallest building in San Antonio, used to have an observation deck up there. And it still is up there, by the way. But it's not accessible to the public anymore, but we would work in that building, and we would crawl out the bathroom window onto the observation deck. And it was really, and Bruce Hathaway, famous KTSA DJ for all those years, would tell me about, he would go up there and people would scratch their names in, and you could still see people's names scratched in up there, and the observation deck up there closed when Hemisphere opened and the Tower of the Americas opened. But it's one of my favorite spots in San Antonio, and I wish they would reopen it for the public. It's a great view up there because you're kind of right in the middle of downtown. But they also have a basement exit that goes into the Plaza Hotel across the street. That building is pretty amazing. It's one of the most one of my favorite buildings in San Antonio, the Tower Life building.
There's another book for you, San Antonio Underground.
Yes.
Passages. Hey, by the way, you can get Mark's book, San Antonio Uncovered, 20% off using the link and the code in the chat feature here on Zoom tonight. We want to make sure you don't miss out, because this would be a great, great Christmas gift for people who have been staying at home lately. And there might be a few of you. So where do we start? We have to start with the Shrine of Texas Liberty, the Alamo.
Yeah.
What are some of the things in San Antonio Uncovered that folks may not know about the Shrine of Texas Liberty?
Well, it's really interesting. First of all, it's not a National Historic Site, and that shocks a lot of people. It's on the Registry of Historic Places, but there's a lot of things like, old homes and stuff like that. The fact that it's not a National Historic Site, when I tell people that, how can the Alamo not be a National Historic Site? And it's really, for years, they didn't want it to be a National Historic Site because they wanted the Daughters of the Republic of Texas want to have complete control over it. It shifted in so many different ways who controlled it, but still, to this day, it's not a National Historic Site, which I find quite amazing, and probably never will be. Another thing that's really amazing that a lot of people don't realize is, it really sat in ruins for a long time after the Battle of the Alamo. A lot of people would take stones and stuff from the Alamo and use it in other buildings, which, is interesting. I went to Rome a few years ago and found out that was very similar for the ruins in Rome, that people would take stones from that and use it in new buildings. So that actually wasn't that uncommon at the time. And then it was a grocery store for a while. It was an army depot. It was all sorts of things before it became the Shrine of Texas Liberty, and it was protected and became such an amazing site as it is now in the middle of downtown San Antonio.
And that parapet on the top of the Alamo?
Yes.
There was it?
No, it was not. That was built by the U.S. Army when they added a roof to the chapel. That actually, the building that's left as the Alamo is the chapel. A lot of people know that, but yeah, the U.S. Army built that many years later when they added the roof back onto it. So yes, and that symbol, the parapet, is probably one of the most iconic symbols of San Antonio. There's so many logos that use that, and few people realize that was not there during the Battle of the Alamo at all. No.
Thank you, Army Corps of Engineers.
Yes, thank you very much, Army Corps of Engineers.
Speaking of the military, you salute the military in so many ways in San Antonio Uncovered. The Alamo, a huge part of military history. What is some of your passion for military history in San Antonio?
Well, there's two things. That's a great question. One, my dad was in the Air Force, and he brought me to San Antonio, and he worked at Lackland Air Force Base. But really, I fell in love with Fort Sam Houston, and it's kind of a shame since 9/11. It's hard to get access to Fort Sam Houston, but there was a time you could take New Braunfels Avenue, and it would cut right through Fort Sam Houston, and there were no gates or anything. I mean, it was just a thoroughfare. And the general public was more than welcome to just wander through Fort Sam Houston. And I would love to wander, take bike rides down there, go through Funston Loop and see the old officer housing, which is some of the most beautiful housing in San Antonio. And that's really the genesis of the whole idea for the book. Started as on a bike ride through Fort Sam Houston one early Sunday morning. And I just stopped at a place called the Gift Chapel that I never heard of before. And the chapel for the troops was built as a gift from the citizens of San Antonio, who all pitched in small amounts to build this beautiful chapel. And President Taft came to open the chapel, and I'm like, wow, how many people know about that? And there's a quarters, officers' quarters, bachelor officers' quarters, or the BOQ as they're called, where Dwight Eisenhower used to live. And General MacArthur, his dad was stationed there, and he grew up there at Fort Sam Houston. And the Air Force was created on the parade grounds when the Army bought a couple of planes from the Wright brothers. And they would take off from the Prairie Ground. And I started finding all this stuff about Fort Sam Houston because there are plaques and so forth. And just that base alone, that post, an Army post, really sparked a lot of interest. And it just really got me, thinking, there's enough here in San Antonio for a book. Maybe a page here and a page there, but you put all these great stories together and document them and find out the truth behind the stories. And I think it would be a book. And that's kind of how the book got started back in the late 80s. And I did the research and it got published in 92 for the first time.
I guarantee you, if you read San Antonio Uncovered from front to back, you're going to go back again and go, wait a minute, it changed since I read it the first time. Because there's so many new facts. It's
Yes.
Trivia. My goodness, this is a great treasure trove of trivia. You mentioned your dad was in the Air Force.
Uh-huh.
San Antonio almost lost the Air Force to somebody else. That story's in the book.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Randolph Field, really, he was called the West Point of the Air for so long. But there's a lot of people who wanted that base built there because it was going to become a big military base. It's just the history of San Antonio, different bases. I mean, Charles Lindbergh did his military training at Kelly Field. I mean, the number of people that came through San Antonio because of the military. Robert E. Lee was stationed here in San Antonio. In fact, this is where he was before he left for the Civil War to fight for the Confederacy. This was his last post, was at Fort Sam Houston. He was a member of St. Mark's Church in downtown San Antonio also. Yeah.
There is so much to digest in San Antonio Uncovered. Let's see, women in aviation. San Antonio is famous for women in aviation. Tell us about Catherine Stinson.
Oh my gosh. That's my favorite story. Stinson Field in south side of San Antonio, named for Catherine Stinson and her family. But she wanted to be an Army pilot, but they wouldn't allow her at the time. So she trained Army pilots in San Antonio, not allowed to be an Army pilot, but she was skilled enough as a pilot to train. And she actually was not very, very tall at all. She was rather short, but she was so famous worldwide. And the fact that, aviation was so fascinating to people. Flying machines were so fascinating. She was famous throughout the world. There were clubs dedicated to Catherine Stinson, and she would travel all over the world to demonstrate her flying skills. And that's why the airport in South San Antonio is named after her and her family. And I think there's a school also now in San Antonio named after her also on the north side. She is, it's amazing too, because nowadays someone like her, I mean, she'd be a valued member of the military, but then she couldn't even get in, but she taught flying lessons also. This is kind of unusual. Speaking of aviation history in San Antonio, the Army bought planes from the Wright brothers, and then they trained pilots here for World War I. And to see planes over San Antonio was very common at the time. There was no other city like that in the U.S. where planes were flying over all the time. I mean, it became a very common sight to see planes here in this city. They really were on the forefront of the aviation movement, especially in the military.
Wow. And speaking of planes in the sky, the first movie to win an Academy Award. Anybody? Do you know the answer? If you want to ask questions of Mark, go ahead and put them in the Q&A in the chat, and we'll get to those. Anybody? Mark, what was it?
It was Wings, 1927. It was filmed here in San Antonio, and it premiered at the Texas Theater in downtown San Antonio, one of the many glorious movie palaces in downtown San Antonio, and it won the Academy Award for Best Picture. And it was a silent movie, and every now and then you'll see it on Turner Classic Movies. I've seen it there before, and you're thinking, you might say to yourself, silent movie, it's very entertaining. It's very well done. The plot, it's a complex plot. It's a very good movie. And so if you do see it pop up, I highly suggest it. And here's something, kind of a side note to it. There was a young actor that was in the movie by the name of, is only on the screen for a very short time. His name was Gary Cooper. And he was in the movie, and people saw him like, who is that actor? He is gorgeous. And that launched his career for being in the movie Wings. And like I said, he was only in there for a very short time.
Wow, y'all gonna watch that Friday night in your midnight movies. Wings, first Academy Award-winning movie, shot right here in San Antonio, Texas. So the Alamo is one of the great reasons that people come and get the historic perspective of San Antonio. But then there's the beautiful, beautiful San Antonio Riverwalk. And you all remember the Joni Mitchell song, "You pay paradise, put up a parking lot." Almost got paved over, didn't it? The Riverwalk.
Yes, and you know, the Riverwalk is one of the top tourist attractions in the state of Texas, but it's really amazing how A, it almost didn't happen, and B, when it did happen, it was pretty much a failure for many, many years. You know, the Riverwalk, especially the horseshoe bend that goes through downtown, and that's where, like, you know, the Hard Rock Cafe and, you know, all the hotels and the Little Rhine Steakhouse and the Hilton is on, that's the horseshoe bend. Well, that area would flood, and the city was tired of having downtown flood all the time. So there was a decision, hey, what if we just pave it over, make it a parking lot, and create a diversion channel? And an architect, Robert Hugman, came in and said, you know what if instead we make a diversion channel, and that way the water can go through, not flood downtown, but the area that does go through downtown, we create this park-like thing called the Riverwalk, and we can have restaurants and boats and so forth, a park-like setting through the middle of San Antonio. Luckily, the Depression hit, and there was all these projects, WPA projects, Work Progress Administration projects, and the Riverwalk became one of these projects and ended up getting built. But after it was built, it was not a success.
It was I believe in the book, you call it a dismal failure.
Yeah, it really was. In fact, it was such a dismal failure that the U.S. military ruled it off limits to their personnel. In fact, a friend of mine, his father was stationed here back in the early 60s, and he said, yeah, the Riverwalk, nobody went to the Riverwalk. It was scary to go down there. There was only one restaurant down there, Casa Rio, which is still there today, and people thought the guy was crazy for opening a restaurant on the Riverwalk. And most buildings that backed up to the Riverwalk really used it as an alley to store trash. What saved it and really altered the whole course of this city was Hemisphere, was the World's Fair in 1968. And hotels started to get built in San Antonio. They extended the Riverwalk north into the fairgrounds, which is actually now where the convention center is now. And people started discovering the Riverwalk, restaurants opened down there, and it totally saved the Riverwalk. And it really changed the perception of the city. San Antonio was not really a tourist attraction type of city, and tourists started coming after Hemisphere and continued to come. And Hemisphere really, that's the one thing in this edition of the book, we did a section on Hemisphere. And I learned a lot more about what the city was like before Hemisphere and how that event really changed the course of the city in a lot of ways.
So if your grandparents, if your great-grandparents are still around, you got to get them together. You kids, read this, read them, quiz them, and they will probably tell you stories that Mark doesn't know. So
Probably do it, yes.
In the Maverick Book Club. Fun fact about the San Antonio Riverwalk. Tell us about the staircases, the stairwells.
So when the architect designed it, he designed every single staircase in the original part of the Riverwalk. Everyone was different. There were no two that were alike. So just the attention to detail you know what? And that's one of my favorite things about it. I'm so glad you asked that, because I always like to take note of the stairwells that go down to the Riverwalk from the street level, because there's no two that are alike. And the expansion that they did a couple of years ago, the Museum Reach and the Mission Reach, especially the Museum Reach, isn't that gorgeous? Isn't that just so beautiful?
You can take your kayak down there and go kayaking anytime.
Yeah, I know. One of my favorite things on the Museum Reach I wouldn't say it was kind of it's funny because when we worked at KXZL, our studios were just down the street from that portion of the river, and it was just there were weeds and it was undeveloped and it was nothing. I mean, it's nothing like it is now, but there was an old VFW post. It's the oldest one in San Antonio. Well, it backed up right to the river. Now it backs up right to the Riverwalk. So it really just gave that VFW post a whole new life. Before, it was just kind of on a side street off of Broadway that very few people knew was down there. Now it's on a prominent part of the Riverwalk, and there's so many things like that now in this new Museum Reach. I love the Museum Reach. It's just gorgeous.
It is. San Antonio is such a big little city. It reminds me of the San Fernando Valley in Southern California. When I got here in '83, I thought I was going to see tumbleweeds and cows and cowboys, but I've yet to see a tumbleweed. You know what? You know what Bette Midler said about San Antonio when she was here? She was born in Hawaii.
Yes.
She was entertaining us at the AT&T Center, and she says, "Oh my God, you know what I love about San Antonio is the skyline. It's not overpowering. They have
Mhm.
a, just a nice, beautiful, small skyline, so that you can still enjoy the sky here."
Mhm.
And she loved comparing it to Hawaii and the Riverwalk. Okay, we're talking about the Riverwalk. The next time you're down there, count the number of stairwells and how different they are. And right up the street from the Riverwalk, there's a lot of old San Antonio money in the King William district.
Oh my gosh. Oh, can I just circle back real quickly? Just a
Yep.
Mark Rybczyk fun fact. I
Yeah.
went to the same high school as Bette Midler. So you say that, yes, my dad was stationed in Hawaii before we came to San Antonio, and I went to Radford High School. We're both alumni of the same high school.
Fun fact.
Just a weird fun fact.
Mark Rybczyk, fun fact. San Antonio covered. It'll be in the next edition.
It'll be the next edition.
Let's say you're hanging out here in the 70s.
Oh my gosh.
You have a beautiful classic antique house. You go
Yeah.
down to William and pick one up for a song.
Oh, that's very, very true. And you know what? This wasn't just San Antonio. This was really a lot of cities that were like this, that had old neighborhoods like that. Most of those houses at that time in the 70s had been divided up into boarding houses and had been, or duplexes or small apartments and so forth. And those houses most of them were run down, and the King William district is nothing like it was now. And slowly it started to turn until it, now, I mean, you go down there, those houses are, multi-million-dollar houses, but the people who bought them also invested a lot of time, effort, and money into restoring those homes. A couple of interesting things about the King William district, it was wealthy merchants, German merchants who helped build the city, and they envisioned, this always just makes me just kind of laugh and cry at the same time. They envisioned that this neighborhood would continue, if you took King William district, just for blocks and blocks and blocks. But at the end, there's the flour mill right there. They got their flour mills, and yeah, the Gunther family built that and kind of ended the district, the King William district, right there, which wasn't really unusual at the time to have neighborhoods that close to factories and mills and so forth, because transportation was very limited back in those days, and many people walked. Cities were very compact, so there were often industrial areas very close to neighborhoods, because it just was convenient.
If you're just joining us tonight for the Maverick Book Club, San Antonio Uncovered, 20% discount. Look for the code and the details in the chat, and get the book and study the history of Fritos.
Fritos were invented in San Antonio. A lot of people don't know this.
How did that happen?
Well, it's a bit of a tale and a bit of a true story that that person that created the Fritos sold the recipe because he wanted to buy an engagement ring to Elmer Doolin, who's the person who started Fritos and started selling them out of his truck, and they became very, very popular, and eventually merged with the Frito-Lay, Mr. Lay, the potato chip maven. But yeah, Fritos started down in San Antonio also. A couple other things that started. This is kind of sad. The first Luby's was in San Antonio too.
Wow.
Bob Luby started his very first cafeteria here, and I don't know if you saw the news today.
Got the word.
Got the word that Luby's is going to liquidate, but Luby's is in San Antonio, as is Fuddruckers. The first Fuddruckers was also it started here in San Antonio also, and that also is going away. So, but Fritos are still here. So,
well, Fuddruckers is a name you never wanted to say on the radio.
No,
correctly. That's a career under right there. What else? San Antonio firsts. What else was first in San Antonio, or what are some of the things that we were like, whoa, that's here in San Antonio?
A couple of things. First of all, a lot of people don't know that the seatbelt was invented in San Antonio. Did you know that?
No, I've got the
yes. Now, okay, let's walk you through it. Okay. We talked earlier about airplanes being in San Antonio, okay? And Lieutenant Benjamin Fuqua, who was pretty much the pioneer of the modern Air Force, he's the guy that flew the planes that the Army bought from the Wright brothers. He was getting bounced around, so he fashioned from a leather strap a belt to keep him in the seat when he was flying. And that was the very first seat belt. He invented the seat belt out of necessity. That was invented in San Antonio. One of my favorite things about something that was created in San Antonio, or planned and designed in San Antonio, and when I wrote the book back in the 90s, not a lot of people knew about this. It's more well known now, but Mount Rushmore was designed in San Antonio. The artist lived here in South Texas, and actually his studio still exists. And you can see his studio, and actually you can rent out his studio for events now.
What?
Yes, if you go to the parking lot, you'll see where it is in the parking lot of Breckenridge Golf Course. Okay, you'll see the golf course house, and off to the left, if you're looking at the clubhouse, there's a small building there, and that was the studio of Gutzon Borglum. It's called the Borglum Studios, and that's where he created and planned his work for Mount Rushmore. And then in the warmer months, he would go up to South Dakota to do his work, and then he'd come back. He would stay at the Menger Hotel, and he would plan out the next year's work during the winter. In South Dakota, it was just too cold to work, get ready for the next year, and go back and forth between the two cities. He also has actually a sculpture outside the Trail Dust Museum. There's a sculpture there by the Whitty. He's got a sculpture there. He also carved, he started the sculpture of Stone Mountain in Georgia. I don't know if you've seen that in the news recently. Okay. He was hired to do that sculpture, had a disagreement with the people who paid him. And so he pushed the model for the sculpture off the top of Stone Mountain, and so it crushed. It took for years before they restarted it. So he was supposed to do it. He didn't end up not doing it, and destroyed the model, so it could not be finished. It was like years later before they were able to restart the work on Stone Mountain with another artist. He also, this is very interesting too, also carved a statue of Woodrow Wilson for Poland, because Woodrow Wilson was pretty instrumental in Poland becoming a nation after World War I. And he's, even though he's controversial here now because of some of his views, in Poland he's very revered because he basically recreated that country. But when Hitler invaded Poland in 1938, he blew up the statue of Woodrow Wilson that Gutzon Borglum created for the country. So there's just some of the different artwork that he has done. But it's interesting if you ever have a chance to rent that building there for an event or something. They've got like pictures and so forth of some of him working on some of the models from Mount Rushmore.
Wow, they should have Gustav Borglum impersonators come and be a part.
Yeah. If you go to the Menger Hotel, there's photos of him and some of the other famous people who stayed at the Menger. You can find photos of Borglum in the Menger Hotel lobby and some of the display cases they have there.
Mark Rybczyk, you know him as a Hawkeye on the radio, but his author name, look right there.
Yes, no vowels.
San Antonio Uncovered. We'd like to buy a vowel, please. Fun facts and hidden histories in San Antonio. But every time you mention something, it just jumps my brain to another topic in this incredible book. You mentioned Gustav Borglum. What about artists like Jesse Trevino?
Oh,
artists and the art that is available on public display here in San Antonio.
You know what? There's so many neat artists in San Antonio, and can I tell you, a gentleman just passed away, and I'm so saddened by this because I don't think he ever got the credit he deserved. In San Antonio, we love his work, and his name is Bob Daddy-O Wade. Now, like you may, I don't really know Bob Daddy-O Wade, but you know his most famous piece, the giant boots outside North Star. And we have
them. They're right here in this snow globe, the giant boots.
Are they really? Do you know that Bob Daddy-O Wade gets paid for every recreation, every photo? He has rights to that. So you can't recreate the boots or have a photo of it without him getting paid. He owns the rights to the likeness of the giant boots.
Thank you, Zach, Fifth Avenue.
He just passed away not too long ago. But back in the 80s, he created a giant iguana outside a restaurant in New York City called the Lone Star, the Lone Star Embassy, and it created such a stir. I mean, it was unbelievable. Also, there was a nightclub in Dallas that had dancing frogs. I think Willie Nelson bought them for a gas station called Carl's Corner. But by far, the boots are his most famous piece of work. But a lot of people don't know the story behind the boots. It's one of my favorite stories. And I got to spend an afternoon chatting with him. And he was really a Texas treasure. He just passed away this past, I think it was 2019. I was so sad to see this happen because I wanted to go visit him and meet him in person. But the boots were actually, it was a piece of public art created for Washington, D.C. Back in, I believe it was in the early 80s. Maybe it was the late 70s. Excuse me, I don't have the correct date, but oh, it's in the book. Yeah, you can look up. But downtown Washington, D.C. was dead. There's nobody going to downtown Washington, D.C. So they had these different artists create these giant pieces of public art. Well, the company that owned North Star, after the exhibit was over, asked if they could buy the giant boots and move them to San Antonio. He said, certainly. But they were so big, okay? He didn't have a permit to carry something that big on the back of a truck. So he took side roads all the way from Washington, D.C. to San Antonio, and he even got, and the boots came apart. So they weren't just like on the back of a truck. They were in different pieces, but still it was huge. And there was an underpass that they got stuck in that they had to back up and find a different way around. And he said it was kind of like Smokey and the Bandit because they had to take all these side roads. They had to stay off the main road because they had no permits to move the giant boots to San Antonio. Years later, he told me the story too, that they caught someone living inside the boots. They found smoke coming out. He had created a little pipe vent. He had a little sterno can in there, created a stove, and he made it his home inside the boots. Someone had just thought it was a good place to move into. So but by far, that's one of my favorite pieces of public art, but there's so many in San Antonio, and it's been a town that's been very, very conducive to public art. It really is. It's one of the great things about San Antonio.
KTSA broadcaster Ricky Ware used to broadcast from there every year.
Yeah, true story. Yes, yeah. You know, another two of my other favorite pieces of public art are murals. One is outside the Lila Cockrell Theater. It's called the Confluence of Cultures, and that was created for Hemisphere in 1968, and it spans the entire front portico of the Lila Cockrell Theater. You can see it, and as they're rebuilding Hemisphere Plaza and creating that big civic area there, that lawn, that'll now be able to be viewed from the lawn. It's going to be fantastic. I'm very excited about that. And then the other one is actually, if you go in the old post office on Alamo Plaza, there's a great mural inside there. Also, a beautiful mural. That building, I think that's one of the most beautiful buildings in San Antonio. It kind of gets lost on Alamo Plaza, but walk inside there and check out the mural in there. Also, that's another great piece of public art.
The things you'll see all around you if you stop look around and take a ride through Fort Sam Houston and go, hey, there's a book idea here. Air conditioning has a history in San Antonio, and we have the first air-conditioned what?
Skyscraper, the first air-conditioned skyscraper. Yes, the Milan building. It's down in San Antonio. You'll see it. It's downtown. It's near the new Frost Tower. And it's funny because when they put air conditioning in there, they literally kind of had to tell people what the value of this was, this thing called air conditioning, and how it's going to change your life and everything, and how you can keep windows closed in the summer. You don't need to get a breeze in. You know what air conditioning kills? The paperweight industry. Totally killed paperweights. You need paperweights anymore because the windows are closed. But the air conditioning was a very interesting system, and it was used like well into like the 80s. It's like, you know, they had giant like ice systems in the basement that air would flow up through to cool off this building, and it was used for a very, very long time. But that building was very, very popular with oil companies, and it was a very prominent address to be in the Milan building.
Wasn't the Robert E. Lee the first air-conditioned hotel?
Yes, it was. It was across the street, which is now a senior citizen apartments.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was the first 100% air-conditioned hotel, and that was, you know, a bit of a selling point at the time. You know, a lot of people remember that hotel in its final days, which was not really a glamorous hotel by any means. And it would say, I remember the sign, Robert E. Lee Hotel, 100% air conditioned. I remember it was kind of like, wow. But you know, in its final days as a hotel, advertising that you had air conditioning was really, you know, not really much of a selling point because everybody had it then.
From the world's largest boots, moved across the country on the side roads, to the Fink Cigar Company, to the coolest miniature golf course in Texas.
Yes.
Fun things in San Antonio uncovered. Let's cover some more.
Okay. You're talking about Cool Crest, the miniature golf course. Oh my gosh. I don't know that place is there's no place like Cool Crest. And it broke my heart when it closed off Fredericksburg Road and it reopened a few years ago. I remember I don't know if they still have this one hole because I haven't been back since they reopened, but I remember they had like little pitching wedges that you used to have to pitch. I mean, no miniature golf course in America had that. And it was so well landscaped and everything. It was so unique. I was so happy to see that come back. That's just such a great San Antonio kind of place. Cool Crest.
A lot of folks probably driven by it hundreds of times on Fredericksburg Road and next to the dairy.
Yeah.
Right off of I-10. Right up the road, there's the beautiful historic Woodlawn Theater where John Wayne hung out one night.
Yes, because that was the premiere of the movie The Alamo, was premiered there at the Woodlawn Theater. And that building, I love that building. It used to have a ballroom in there, the Woodlawn Ballroom. And there's a movie theater there that was open really for a very long time. I mean, it didn't close until I think like the early 80s, I think is when it finally stopped showing movies. But San Antonio, it's interesting. San Antonio had like three different waves kind of movie theaters. The classic ones downtown, like the Majestic, and the Aztec, and they've all kind of been repurposed. And then they had like they were called the suburban movie theaters, like the Woodlawn on Fredericksburg Road. And a lot of those too, if you look carefully, you can find them too. They've been repurposed and you can hardly tell they're movie theaters anymore. And in the book, we list some of them and what they've become. But like there was the Laurel, that was a big movie theater on San Pedro. The San Pedro Theater also, guess what street that was on. But there, a lot of these first wave of movie theaters that moved out of downtown. They were very popular for a while, but like I said, they've been repurposed. Probably one of the most famous ones is on Broadway. There's an old movie theater across from the Central Market. You can tell it still has the marquee out front. That was another one too.
Josephine, I believe.
No, the Josephine. Oh, you know what? The Josephine is that's down off St. Mary's, and Josephine by the Burger Boy. Right by the Burger Boy. It used to be a Whopper Burger.
Directions. You have to give
yes.
it next to the restaurant.
Yeah, it's kind of where St. Mary's and Josephine kind of meet, and there's it's across the street, catty-corner from the Burger Boy that used to be the Whopper Burger.
Turn left where the Texaco used to be.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's where it is. You know where it is.
Yeah, I think the Broadway Theater is across from me.
I think you used to live down like behind that. Didn't you live down back there?
I lived a few places.
Yeah, back before it was like real super fashionable. We used to live down in those neighborhoods because it was super cheap rents down off St. Mary's in those neighborhoods. I think my first rent down there off San Pedro, I think it was like $240 a month is what I paid for an apartment, and my apartment had it was built with limestone and had a balcony. It was a fourplex and had if you've ever been in the what's it called, the Broadway 50/50 Club, is that still down there? Okay, if you've ever been in there, they have this blue smoke mirror tile out front. That tile from that club, they had extra tile and they used it to tile my bathroom. And it was the most beautiful bathroom in San Antonio.
Was that the one just down the street from the first Taco Cabana?
Yes, as a matter of fact, yes. The first Taco Cabana was built in an old Dairy Queen at the corner of Hildebrand and San Pedro, and it was so amazing when it first opened. It got so popular. This was before it became a chain, that they literally had to close the side street because people would cut through the neighborhood so they get into the drive-through lane faster. So they actually built a fence across the street because of the first Taco Cabana, because it was so popular. I remember when they built a second one, we were like, because I lived so close to the first one, I could smell fajitas from my house. I felt kind of offended, like, they're going to build a second one? What?
Oh, they built a few.
Yeah, yes.
You started out tonight's conversation wondering if you've ever been called a maverick. What is the Maverick history here in San Antonio? We know about The Maverick Plaza, what's the deal?
Well, the Maverick Plaza in La Vita is named for Murray Maverick, who was a former mayor of San Antonio. But that name goes back all the way to the Alamo, Samuel Maverick. And legend, it's the term Maverick, which means, you know, someone is wild and untamed. The story goes that Samuel Maverick, never branded his cattle. So if you found a cattle that was unbranded, it was known to be a Maverick because it was one of his. That's kind of the legend, the story. In the book, it kind of explains really kind of more how that story, what started it, and how it kind of got blown out a little bit out of proportion. But the funny thing to me is that term really is based on a gentleman from San Antonio, a very prominent San Antonio family, the Maverick family, and with a very prominent history here in this city. One guy in Texas hates San Antonio more than any other guy, and that's Mark Cuban, who owns the Dallas Mavericks, whose team is named after. I don't even think he knows that that term comes from a very prominent San Antonio family and where the history of that term is. And he hates San Antonio because San Antonio so often would ruin the Mavericks' chances when it came to the NBA. And you know, so I just find that kind of a little delicious piece of humor that Mark Cuban, who hates San Antonio so much, just hates anything about it because they've spoiled so many of his plans. His team is named after a prominent San Antonian.
Mark Cuban, the people love to hate him. San Antonio Uncovered, I guarantee you will love this book from Trinity University Press. And you talked about the Spurs.
Yes.
Spurs are a part of the book, but there's also an incredible bar bet question. So let's talk about the Spurs. We'll talk about the Cotton Bowl.
Okay. This is kind of interesting. Cotton Bowl, everybody remembers the Cotton Bowl game in Dallas every year, New Year's Eve game that's been going on for many, many years. And I always ask people, I go, what school in San Antonio, or I should say, I take that back, what team from San Antonio played in the Cotton Bowl? People, maybe St. Mary's University, which might be a good guess because at one time they had a very prominent football team, a team that actually Dwight Eisenhower was football coach of for a number of years, for a couple of years. The answer actually, this is a great question because very few people know. The answer actually is Randolph Field. Yes, Randolph Air Force Base, known as Randolph Field in World War II, had a team, and they played in the Cotton Bowl during World War II when travel was limited, and a lot of the military had college players come in to be part of the military, and they had a team. So yes, the Randolph Field Ramblers played in the Cotton Bowl one year, and it's interesting if you go to I think it's the Officers Club, I think, has an area dedicated to the Ramblers. They contacted me and asked me to help them kind of put together the history of the Randolph, the team that played in the Cotton Bowl. And I was very touched to do that for them. It was pretty cool.
Wow, what a great trivia question. Let's talk about the Spurs now, and then we're going to go to a question from one of our folks who tuned in the Maverick Book Club tonight. San Antonio Spurs, they have a storied history here, of course.
Oh my gosh. San Antonio. This is one of the most valuable franchises in the NBA. I mean, I don't need to tell you. I mean, I feel like being a Spurs fan is kind of like winning the lottery. I mean, it's so wonderful. I love Manu Ginobili. Manu Ginobili is my favorite. But it's interesting that actually there was a league called the American Basketball Association, the ABA, and they were a rival league to the NBA. They were kind of like their little sisters. And there was a team in Dallas called the Dallas Chaparrals. And they weren't doing too well, and they were like gonna fold, and they pretty much leased them. They rented them to these businessmen in San Antonio, and they finally, those businessmen in San Antonio finally were like, let's see if we can just buy this instead of leasing it from these other owners. And they kind of bluffed their way through it, and they end up purchasing the San Antonio Spurs for pennies on the dollar. I mean, they got them very, very cheap. But once again, they were in this league, the American Basketball Association, that few people remembered, and the league was not that successful. Well, the league ended up merging, so to speak, with the NBA. 4 teams from the ABA were adopted into the NBA in the 70s, the Spurs being one of them, the others being the Indiana Pacers, the Nets, the New York Nets, who later became the New Jersey and the Brooklyn Nets, and the Denver Nuggets were the 4 teams that were brought over. This is kind of an interesting side note. For years, There was one team that really wanted to come on over also. They were from St. Louis. They were called the Spirits of St. Louis. And the NBA said, no, 4 is it. We're going to take 4 teams. That's it. Well, this guy who owned the Spirits of St. Louis, instead of taking a payout like the other owners, he asked, you know what I would like? I would like the Spurs, the other 3 teams, the Pacers, the Nets, and the Nuggets, to give me 1/7 of their TV revenue for the rest of my life, till the end of time. And the Spurs and the other teams were like, yeah, we'll do that, because there were no TV revenue. It was like, sure, we'll do that. In fact, the NBA at the time was so unpopular. To watch the NBA Finals, it was on tape delay after the 10 o'clock news in San Antonio. So they're like, sure, we'll do that. Well, over the course of years, that became very valuable. And the NBA was paying this guy who didn't even have a team anymore 4/7 of a team's share of TV revenues. And it was millions and millions and millions of dollars that this guy made off this team that he no longer owned. They call it the best deal in sports. The NBA finally bought him out. I think it was for about $500 million, finally bought him out a few years ago because he was getting old and he wanted to settle his estate. But it's the best deal ever. So the 2 teams, the Spurs got a great deal, San Antonio got a great deal, and then the guy who owned the Spirits of St. Louis also got a great deal.
What a deal. We're talking with Mark Rybczyk, the author of San Antonio Uncovered Fun Facts and Hidden Histories of San Antonio, Texas. And the original version came out in 1992. What did you update? What are a couple of things that you updated for the latest edition?
I updated a lot on Hemisphere. I updated a lot on that. Also on the Riverwalk, because there's been so many changes on the Riverwalk. And a couple of things that I can't wait to update on the next edition. Can I add that in here now, because they're not in there?
Sure you can.
Okay. One is the Hot Wells Hotel. I am so sad. First of all, I love what we've done with that, okay? Because what was left of it. But I'm so sad that they had to cap the springs and the pools do not work. I remember when I started out in the radio, I did traffic for a while. I remember flying over the Hot Wells Hotel and looking down and saw someone swimming in that pool. Someone was swimming in the pool, Dave. And a friend of mine, shout out Mark Stewart, and I, we drove out there. We bought a 6-pack of beer, and we saw that there was someone living in a mobile home, like he was a caretaker for the property. We thought, you know what? Let's see if we can bribe this guy with a 6-pack and let us tour the Hot Wells Hotel. Maybe, go swimming in the hotel. The pool, which the building had been falling apart, but the water was still flowing into the pool every day, this fresh, hot spring water. Well, he would not allow us to come in because he had the greatest deal in San Antonio. He had this hot spring fed pool all to himself. And it pains me that they couldn't save the pool and the building ended up burning down. But that hotel at one time, they brought celebrities would come to stay at the Hot Wells Hotel. The Cincinnati Reds held spring training there one year. It was, they had a train tracks, so private rail cars would come up there. And it just kind of was forgotten about for decades. And it actually closed. It stayed open till 1980 as a hotel. And then it just fell into disrepair for years. I'm very happy to see that the city has embraced it, because I know so many people have put so many years of effort into doing that. And I'm glad to see that, what it's become. But I feel like it was a missed opportunity. And I know I'm not the only one who feels that way. I know everybody who fought for that really wanted it to be a lot more, but sometimes in historic preservation, you take what you can get. And then the other thing that's going to be in the next edition of the book, hopefully, is, I did not know this. Bruce Hathaway told me this story, and Johnny Cash and his wife, his girlfriend, Vivian, at the time, was from San Antonio. He later married her. That was his first wife. Carved their names in a bench on the Riverwalk. Did Bruce ever tell you this story?
It's down there near to a river center, right?
Yeah. And then what happened is Vivian, his wife, after they divorced, she came back to San Antonio and contacted the city through an intermediary and said, I'd like to buy that bench that Johnny and I carved our names into. And the city was like, what are you talking about? And she said, come, I'll show you. And she showed him the bench, and you could see where, it was Johnny Loves Vivian. And And the city was like, no, we're not going to say that bench. No, we can't do that. That's city property. So they immediately moved the bench off the Riverwalk, which had been there for decades. Now it's in the Whitty Museum, so you can see it in the Whitty Museum. But if I could just plug, there's a great documentary. It's called My Darling Vivian, and it talks about Johnny Cash and his first wife, and it was a love affair. It was amazing love. They met here in San Antonio, and I did not know this till recently. They got married at St. Anne's Church on Fredericksburg Road. I did not know Johnny Cash got married there till just recently. So, wow. Yeah, I just found that out. I'm so excited. Like, I can't wait to do the next edition of this book to add that in there.
Teach an old DJ new stuff, but not much. Charlotte wanted to circle back to Gustav Borglum and his studio.
Okay.
Was that near the old pump station number 2?
Yes, it was. Yeah, in fact, yes. Actually, his studio was a pump station. There were pump stations that would pump water up and down. Yeah, they were pump stations. In fact, I think it may have been pump station number 2. I think actually, yeah. But his studio was an old pump station. Yes, stars up, nice one.
You were talking about celebrities. Of course, Carol Burnett from San Antonio.
Yeah.
Mike Nesmith's mom. She was a teacher here.
Yes, she invented liquid paper also. And Michael Nesmith, for those who don't remember, he was in the Monkees.
Yeah.
Yeah, his mom's from San Antonio.
Shaquille O'Neal has a little bit of a military kind of history.
Yeah, he went to Cole High School. His dad was his stepfather actually was based here, was stationed at Fort Sam Houston, and he won the state championship at Cole High School before going off to LSU, and then of course a star in the NBA. And you know what? He does not like San Antonio. I don't know what it is. He does not have a love affair with San Antonio. I don't know what it is. I've heard rumors that maybe he went to go visit the Spurs or something when he played high school and he didn't get a nice reception. I don't know what it is, but he doesn't really embrace San Antonio for someone who won the state championship here. So it's interesting.
Tara has a question in the chat. She wants to know about the first radio station on the air in San Antonio, because the 100th anniversary of that station is kind of coming up in 2022.
Are we talking, and it's in the book, and is it WOAI or is it KTSA?
I believe it's WOAI.
Okay, WOAI, yeah, WOAI, yeah, which I used to work at. KTSA and WOAI are, two of the oldest stations in San Antonio. And WOAI is one of the few stations west of the Mississippi that has a W. That's how old it is. There's a handful, but later a station west of the Mississippi, just to identify it, starts with a K, like KTSA and WAI. Can I just say shout out to Channel 4 for reclaiming those call letters too, for WAI TV too. I thought that was great. They did that too.
That is pretty awesome. Yeah. And Clear Channel radio station, which means it's the only radio station on that frequency.
Yeah, this is interesting too. iHeartRadio, if you're familiar with iHeartRadio, okay, that was formerly a company called Clear Channel Radio. And that started here in San Antonio. And there was a time you could only own 8 radio stations, 8 AM and 8 FM. And Clear Channel started here in San Antonio. They owned WAI, and they owned KJ97 and a handful of other stations. And then when the laws were changed, where you could own multiple radio stations in one market, and also almost unlimited amount of radio stations, the owners started acquiring more and more radio stations. And yeah, Clear Channel, or iHeartRadio, the iHeartRadio app, everybody's familiar with all that. That is a company from San Antonio that started here in San Antonio.
Yeah, and Tara says WAI might have been under different call letters. So if anybody knows what those are, go ahead and put them in chat. We want to learn along with you tonight.
Yeah, I think you might be correct about that, and I have to check out. There's so many. It's so funny. There's so much stuff in the book, and I had to do so much research and fact checking and so forth, that there's a lot of. I have to kind of keep going back and forth sometimes. And I'll read my own book, and I'll just be. It's like I feel like I didn't even write it sometime, and that doesn't mean I plagiarized. That just means there's so much in the book, and some of it I wrote so long ago. It's like I relearned some of these stories so many times. And can I just say too, that I think one of the reasons that the book in 1992 resonated with so many people, became such a cult classic, is so many of these stories that are in the book are stories that were told to me that nobody had ever researched before or had written down anywhere before. And for the first time, many of these stories were written down and researched and fact checked. And there were a lot of stories also that I had been told that I did a lot of research on and found out that they were just tall tales or that they were just legends. They weren't true. There's a fly in my house. So I think that's why in 1992, and also when it was published for the first time in 92, there weren't a lot of books on San Antonio. You would go down to the bookstore, the B. Dalton's or the Walden's book in the mall, and there would be some books on Texas, but very few, if any, on San Antonio. And so, I mean, it really stood out. And now you go to, there's tons of books on San Antonio, and the interest in the city is just so immense in the history, which San Antonio always had a history, interest in their history, but it was more of an oral history, I believe. This was one of the first books to actually kind of write it down.
The next time you bring your family to San Antonio, you got to bring a copy of San Antonio and read it beforehand, so you guys can do you have little excursions.
Yes,
little excursions in the book, and you have an interesting story about how Trinity University Press helped bring out this new edition.
I am so grateful, and I still can't believe that the way this all happened. So here's the first book here. This is the first one that came out in 92. And it was a company called Republic of Texas Press. And then we did a reprint, a second edition, also from Republic of Texas Press. And I think this came out like early 2000s. And then Republic of Texas Press sold to a company on the East Coast. And I would contact them multiple times, and I would say, hey, I'd like to do an update of San Antonio Uncovered. And I don't think you realize how popular this book is in San Antonio. I couldn't get anybody to return a phone call. I couldn't get anybody to answer a letter or an email. Nobody from the company responded to me. And if you know the publishing world, the publisher has the rights. You sell the rights to the book. So they had the rights to do with what they wanted. And they were a big company, and they could care less about it. And I was kind of just very saddened, because I thought, I don't want this book to die. I want to update this book. Out of the blue, Tom Payton from Trinity University Press calls me one day and says, hey, I'm the publisher at Trinity University Press. We're big fans of your book, San Antonio Uncovered. We would love to do an updated version of it, which was my dream, because Republic of Texas Press was based in Plano, and I always wanted a San Antonio publisher. And I told Tom, I said, I would love for you guys to do it, but I don't own the rights, obviously. A company on the East Coast does, and I've written them, and I can't get them to respond to me. And Tom goes, we've had some dealings in matters like this before. Would you allow me to craft you a letter that you can copy and paste and sign and send via registered mail to the publisher? And I think after I think this might expedite the process. And I said, sure. So he sent me a copy of a letter that basically said, hey, either republish or give me back the rights. This letter, Dave, I could have never written this letter in a million years. It was the most well-crafted legalese letter ever. And I copied and pasted, signed it. I sent it registered mail. Like 3 days after they got it, I got a note back from them giving me the rights back to the book. And Trinity University Press and we worked out a plan, and we're able to update the book and bring it back. So thank you, Trinity University Press. They really saved the book. It's fantastic. It's just, I still can't believe out of the blue that Tom called me like that. I thank my lucky stars that happened.
What a great organization. And can I plug another book that they had a
yes
event with Lila Cockrell last year.
Yeah.
Lila's book, Love Deeper Than a River, from Trinity University Press. That is a must get for any San Antonian who loves the city. And I'm sure she's got a big part of your book too. And a lot of the history, the political history, sports history, artistic history. Mark, it's been a really fast hour with you. And we've probably covered like this much of your book, just only a little bit. So
I will say it's a fun read. It's a quick read. The chapters are quick and stuff, and I hope it just spurs interest. Can I give a plug too for my novel? Can I do that?
Okay, the Travis Club is a cinematic masterpiece. It'll blow your mind. It is so good.
I call it San Antonio Uncovered, the novel. It's available on Amazon, and we're actually during this COVID, I spent so much time at home. The sequel's almost finished, so we've been working on that. So I don't know why I say we when it comes to my writing project, because it's just me, but
I think there's a higher power working in your life.
Maybe so.
And I can't wait to see the movie, The Travis Club.
I'm hoping someday that it becomes a movie. That'd be fantastic. And I
That's
hope
in my mind.
film with
Mark,
San Antonio.
is there anything else folks need to know about you and your love of San Antonio, and anything else we need to know about its hidden histories before we say adios?
You know what? You can look me up via Trinity University Press if you have a question or something. Please feel free to contact me if you have something about San Antonio story you want to share and like me to research it for an upcoming edition of San Antonio Covered. That's really how I got most of the stories, is people told me things and I just did the research on it. So I'm always open to hearing people's stories and tales.
I've got more stories for you, and so does everybody else. Share them with Mark, and he will share them with the world. Mark, thank you so much for being a part of this community still, because your heart is here in the Alamo City. Thank you, Mark.
Dave, thank you for allowing me to stay at your house. All those years I would drive down to San Antonio and do research, and then stayed at your house. People don't know that part of the story. It would not have happened if it wasn't for Dave back in the late 80s and early 90s. I stayed for free at his house when I had no money. Thank you for that, Dave, because you're a big part of this.
Yeah, you owe me one, okay? Thank you for joining us for the Maverick Book Club. This is a monthly series from Trinity University Press discussing books that are shaping the narrative landscape of Texas, especially San Antonio, Texas. The next one's going to be Wednesday, October 14th at 7 p.m. Save the date, featuring the book In the Loop, A Political and Economic History of San Antonio by David R. Johnson, in conversation with one of our favorite columnists, Rick Casey. So you can register now for this free event via link in chat on topress.org, tupress.org, and in the confirmation email, you'll get a link and a promo code to pre-order the book at the special Maverick Book Club price, 20% off, going fast, right now in the chat. San Antonio Uncovered. Mark, unless you made other plans, great day, and we'll see you on the radio.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you very much for hosting this today.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.